Now we have looked at how to measure distance between two individual records or distance between two clusters. In the case of clusters, then we have several different ways in which we can estimate the distance between the two clusters. So now how do we put all of these together in coming up with clusters? So then we have a couple of different methods. One is called hierarchical method, and then the other one is k mean clusters. Okay, so we'll look at both of them. Hierarchical methods start with lots of clusters. In fact, you'll start with one cluster for each record. So each record is a cluster by itself. Okay, and then you slowly combine some of the records that are close to each other, and keep combining, and build your clusters, and the clusters will now grow in size until, of course, the ending point will be that you have only two clusters. So you start with, suppose if you have 10,000 records, start with 10,000 clusters, and then combine them, and finally you end up with just two clusters, because above that it will be just one cluster. One cluster means everything is that's your starting data point, data set. So that is your hierarchical method, which is also called agglomerative method. Okay, so begin with n clusters. Okay, each record is its own cluster. Keep joining them, and then go up. So this is very popular. And another method is to start with one cluster and then divide them into smaller and smaller clusters, but this is not very popular. So we have agglomerative method, and then you have k means cluster. So we will look at these two methods. So you start with n clusters, and then merge the two closest records into one cluster. Okay. Now here is where how do you measure closest becomes a choice. So by closest, will you look at the minimum distance, the single linkage distance, or multiple linkage distance, or centroid distance, or average distance? Well, so that's something that you have to decide, and then you will combine. So at each successive step, two clusters closest to each other are merged. So you keep repeating until you are done. So in the case of hierarchical clustering, you can develop what is called a dendrogram map. So that is from bottom up, and it illustrates the process, and then we can decide how many clusters that we really want to have. So dendrogram is something like this. So here we start with the 22 observations. They all are each individual observation is a cluster, right? Then of course at that point distance are all zero, because the distance between a record and itself is zero. So now you look at the closest record. Okay, so the dendrogram, the y-axis is the distance between clusters. So the length of the line that you see here for each record is the distance between itself and the next closest cluster. So at the beginning, each record is a cluster, and as you go up, so here this length represents the distance between these two clusters, and so on. So here, if you take the if you take the red line, right, and if you bring it down here, if this is the distance that you want to use to determine your clusters, so in that case none of the lines join up. So each record is a cluster by itself. And as you increase the distance threshold, so at this point, so what happens is actually this one is slightly longer. So the first set is these two will get joined up into one cluster, and then these two will get joined up into one cluster. Then you keep going up. So at this point, if this is the distance threshold, then you see that all of these will be individual clusters. All of these will be individual clusters. These two will form one cluster because they are joined together. Then these two will be one cluster. This is not joined yet at this distance level. So this will be an individual cluster, and rest of them will be individual clusters. And as you go up, okay, if you set 2.5 as your distance threshold, then these four will be one cluster because they have all been joined. So this is not joined with anything. So 6 will be a cluster by itself. Okay, 3 will be a cluster by itself. 9 will be. Now 2 and 22 will be a cluster. Now here these 4 will be a cluster, and so on.